It's often said that work isn't simply a source of income alone, but it's also a source of direction and fulfillment and purpose. And if that's right, then the challenge of automation isn't just that it hollows out the labor market, leaving less income for people, but it might also hollow out that sense of purpose and meaning.
So the underlying question that has been at the heart of this is, what is a society where there's a future without work? There's an economist from Oxford who has literally written a book like this. We've stolen his title, A World Without Work, because he presaged this almost 5 to 7 years ago, when there was an understanding that AI would only replace routine jobs. And the one thing that I disagreed with our panelists, and I can say it safely now that they're not on stage, is that they're talking about skills being replaced. But there's a possibility of us in our essence being replaced. And Daniel Susskind, who is an advisor to the UK government, he's at the Future Institute of AI at Oxford, and as I said, he's written books on this, presaged that it would not be just routine jobs, but non-routine jobs. Not just, I shouldn't use the word just, but not mechanical workers, but knowledge workers who would be replaced by AI. And so he's the perfect person to answer a lot of the questions that have been thrown up in previous sessions, some of which I was easy on with Piyush and Eric, but I think they're the perfect questions for an economist and philosophers to answer. What is the future of human society? How should we think about a world without work? So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Daniel Susskind on stage. And before that, again, a little sort of window into the world that we are describing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Daniel Susskind, and with him Rajat Kathuria, who's an economist with Shiv Nadar University and was also an economist with iCrea before. So please welcome Daniel and Rajat.
Thank you. So good to see you.
Daniel, you know, I don't know how much of the morning you were here, but this recurring question has come whether this is really a tectonic, disruptive difference. We just showed a little capsule of how there's always been technological disruption. Yeah. But there's a very strong sense that this time it's different, you know. So as somebody who's really been watching AI and the relationship with work and societies for many years, what's your take on it? Is this just one other milestone, or is it radically different?
Yeah. I mean, every day, and I should begin by saying what a pleasure it is to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation and for making this happen. I mean, every day we hear stories of systems and machines that are taking on tasks and activities which until recently we thought only human beings alone could ever do. You know, making medical diagnoses and driving cars, drafting legal contracts and designing buildings, composing music and writing news reports. And we caught a glimpse of that in that video there and I think this morning as well. You know, what does all of this mean for the vast majority of us for whom our job is our main, if not our only, source of income? I think this is, you know, one of the greatest questions of our time. And to answer your question, I don't think we're taking seriously enough the threat of a world where there's not enough work for people to do because of these technological disruptions that are taking place.
Right. You know, so Rajat, I wanted you to join in the conversation. And,
sure.
I mean, more than as a co-discussant, a co-questioner of Daniel, and I'd love to have your thoughts on it as well.
So, you know, absolutely. Let me say, Shoma, what a pleasure it is to be here. Also, and it's been a wonderful morning, and the sort of things that we've heard since the morning sort of in terms of productivity impacts, in terms of labor market impacts, have been incredible. A couple of things come to mind before I ask Daniel a question. You know, Tom Friedman said something which has sort of stuck with me. I've been thinking of it since the morning. He said, you know, everywhere the productivity has gone up, and productivity, or sort of increase, as economists say, increasing returns to scale, you need fewer and fewer people and fewer probably machines to get the same level of output. But in Beethoven's Ninth, whoever is being conducted by, let's say, you still need the same number of violinists, or in other words, there would be constant returns to scale, and you'd get, you know, similar very nice output from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So you don't require that technological progress for the welfare impact, right? To get the same level of output from the 50 cellists or the 50 violinists, you're getting the same level of output. So the question is, I'm putting this to Daniel, in the context of course, developed markets, mature markets.
Yeah.
So what are we serving? Why are we doing this? Yeah. In the sense, this is supply driven. This is sort of, is this demand driven, or is this supply, this progress, and do we really need it? Is it serving a welfare impact? If Beethoven's Ninth can be heard without increasing returns to scale, why not other facets of our life?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that not everyone can be an orchestral musician. The more serious answer is that we need technological progress to solve the great challenges that humanity faces. You know, the start of the 20th century was marked by worklessness, it was marked by poverty, it was marked by low levels of education, poor healthcare, and 70, 80, 90 years of technological progress has seen a transformation in many parts of the developed world. I should just say, though, by way of preface, just to add a bit more to the response, that I don't think there's going to be some big technological bang in the next few years after which everyone wakes up and find themselves without work. I don't think that's going to happen. Work is going to remain for some time to come. I mean, what I worry about for now, and in the medium term, so the next 10 or 15 years, is a world where there is work for people to do, but for various important and perhaps intractable reasons, people might not be able to do that work. Most obviously they might not have the right skills to do the new jobs that are created, but there's other reasons they might not be able to as well. So it's a less sort of cinematic fear, less dramatic fear than robots taking everyone's jobs, but I don't think it's any less consequential. That said, I do think as we look further into the 21st century, the nature of the challenge might change from one where there aren't enough jobs to be done, one where there are jobs for everyone to do, to one where there just aren't enough jobs, full stop.
So what is the nature of that society,
Yes.
Daniel? Like I said, that you actually were prescient about this. And it's interesting, Daniel's father, who's also a technologist, he created the first app for a legal...
So he did his doctorate in artificial intelligence and the law at Oxford in the 1980s. So he was really part of the vanguard, and he developed the world's first commercially available AI system in the law.
Right.
Yeah.
So they co-wrote a book called The Future of Professions, and
That's right.
you said at your breakfast table you would chew over technological conundrums for
Yes.
as bread.
Sort of strange family preoccupation.
Strange family, yeah. So you've kind of had a sense of this universe that might yet come. So how do we even think of a society where it may be a little far away still,
Yeah.
and like you said, it may be a slow creep, that particular parts of jobs will get taken away, or there'll be displacement of, say, knowledge workers. It's not like immediately 300 or 600 million people out of jobs.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a sense, and an increasing sense, that work does not necessarily have to mean identity or purpose, So do you have any sense of what else might come to define us?
I think just on the sort of family story, I think what my dad and I and my brother as well, who writes about the impact of technology on politics, have got right is this assumption, and you have to remember it when you're thinking about technology, that when you pick up your iPhone, your smartphone, you open your tablet, that's the worst it's ever going to be. And the one trend we can be pretty sure about, and it's held for some time and it's going to continue to hold, is that these systems and machines are just going to become more and more capable. And they're going to take on more and more activities that until recently we thought only human beings could do. What does this future look like? I think you have to be very clear about the different problems that we might face. One problem that we might face, and it's been discussed a little already today, is the economic problem, the problem of distribution. How do we share our income in society if we can't rely upon the world of work to do it? And that's, we have relied upon the world of work in the 20th century. What do we do if we can't rely upon the world of work in the 21st? But then there are other problems that have less to do with economics. One is the problem of power, and in particular the political power of large technology companies. And I know that's something that you're interested and concerned by, and we've spoken about that before. And the other is this issue of meaning and purpose. It's often said that work isn't simply a source of income alone, but it's also a source of direction and fulfillment and purpose. And if that's right, then the challenge of automation isn't just that it hollows out the labor market, leaving less income for people, but it might also hollow out that sense of purpose and meaning. And so, if you're thinking about how to redesign society in the 21st century for a world with less work, you've got to think quite systematically about those three very different types of problem: the problem of distribution, the problem of power, and the problem of meaning.
So I think, Shoma, if I could come in there, I think, Daniel, you've picked on a point that is on everybody's mind today, starting with that book that came out, Piketty's book that came out several years ago, and then there's been a lot of work along distribution and inequality, and it's a sort of, apart from jobs, there's a huge concern about inequality and the concentration of wealth. So I wanted to ask you, obviously there are responses that governments could have, markets could have. Now, the view in the US has often been laissez-faire, leave the market alone, and you'll get better outcomes, and maybe they'll be trickled down where everybody will be better off. Europe, including UK, has been a little more, I guess Europe much more than UK, has been a little more sort of regulatory. Its approach has been a little more sort of intrusive, looking at distribution effects much more closely, including mergers and acquisition. But the question is that if everything, I know you've written in your book that you're not a technological determinist, right? I mean, I saw that. But even if you're not technological determinists, the thing is that technology is going to drive. The top 10 companies
Yes.
are all technologically advanced companies.
Yes.
And the distribution of wealth is becoming more and more unequal. And I know that the median income of a US worker is 3,000 times less. Or in other words, the disparity between median and the CEO's take-home pay is extraordinarily high.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just sort of an anecdote, but
and getting bigger.
And getting bigger.
Yeah.
And getting bigger. So now, this market is this institution, this animal that sometimes works, that sometimes doesn't work. In this case, if inequality is a bad outcome, then it's not working well.
Yes.
How could we get the market to work better without being sort of killing the innovative spirit in the markets? How do you get that?
That's the big challenge. I mean, I should say that I don't think it's a coincidence that worries about inequality, exactly as you're describing, are intensifying today at exactly the same time that worries about automation are growing. These two problems, inequality and technological unemployment, are really closely related. Today, the labor market, as I said, is the main way that we share our income in society. For most people, their job is their main, if not their only, source of income. And the vast inequalities we see around us today show that this approach is already creaking, that some people get vastly more for their efforts than others. Technological unemployment, a world where there's less work for people to do because of technology, is just a more extreme version of that story, but one where some people don't receive anything at all. And so I think these two problems are very closely related. And so when people say, we don't need to worry about technological unemployment, it's a distant problem, it's something that just doesn't really affect society today, I think that's a mistake. It's very closely related to these inequalities that we already see around us today. What do we do about it? There's various responses to that. One is to go back to the opening observation that you made, that I'm quite firm that I'm not a technological determinist. Yes. I don't think that the future is going to be a particular way, but I am what I call a technological realist. I think that these technologies are just going to get better and better over time. And so the question is, given this technological context, how might we shape or direct these technologies, perhaps in ways that reduce inequality or improve the quality of work? Let me give you one example. People who are interested in the impact of technology on work often distinguish between two different effects that technology can have on the workplace. On the one hand, it can displace, it can substitute for people at particular tasks and activities. A medical diagnostic system displacing a doctor from making a diagnosis, or it can complement people's activities, making them more valuable and more important for human beings to do. What's very interesting, if you look at the US tax system, is that at the moment, the effective tax rate on labor is far higher than the effective tax rate on capital, on using a robot. So at the margin, a business owner, a business leader is going to lean towards automating a task, developing a technology that can substitute for human beings, rather than want to complement a human being and make human beings more valuable. So you could say that, one response is, okay, we ought to reinvestigate, reconfigure the US tax system to try and nudge this technological progress in a direction that we feel more comfortable with. That's the sort of idea that I think is particularly important in the policy world at the moment.
So Daniel, in fact, that's a good spot to come in, that there's a kind of inevitability. I don't know if Eric is here, but there's this sense that a lot of the technologists put out that there's a kind of inexorability to this technology, that it will come, And that's where I was wondering that, is that just a human fiction, because when nuclear weapons were created, it could also have been an inexorable thing that it'll just spread and no one can stop it, and you know that this could destroy humanity, but you still just keep proliferating.
Yeah.
But actually countries came together to harness it in,
Yeah.
So again, having watched this phenomenon so much,
Yeah.
do you think that there's an inevitability to the fact that AI is just going to keep exponentially growing?
Yeah.
Or, like you just said, is it at all possible that you'll hold it back and then the deployment of it will be in only doses that society can absorb?
Yeah. Well, I think the nuclear example is a terrific one because our nuclear weapons today are more powerful than they have ever been in human history. But yet, through the 20th century, we managed to change the direction of that technological progress through collective agreement, through multinational cooperation, to constrain the use of those technologies in particular settings. And so I think there's something analogous about technological progress in the form of artificial intelligence today. If you think the solution to the problem of artificial intelligence is to slow down, stop, or go into reverse, I think that's a mistake. I think it's thinking about the direction, it's thinking about technological progress as if the only direction you can move in is sort of forward, faster, or backwards. And actually, it's not like we're a train stuck on fixed rails and our direction is predetermined and all we've got to do is decide what speed we go. That's not right. It's more like we're a boat on the sea and we can choose which direction we go in. And what we ought to be doing is trying to encourage the development of artificial intelligence in particular directions rather than trying to slow or to even stop. That's my personal view on this technology.
Can I ask you a provocative question?
Yes, please.
I mean, it's
not too
provocative, but I mean, just taking up from where Shoma left off. And what David said this morning was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
He said something, progress for progress's sake is like a cancer cell.
Yes.
I'm not a biologist, so I don't understand what that means, but metaphorically I do.
Yes.
Forgive me, a little long-winded, because the question is coming from, let's say, the trade literature.
Yeah.
Right? So you're trying to look at labor markets and trade together. As Samuelson said, trade in goods and services is often a substitute for trade in labor. So if you can't move labor, you move the goods embodied in the labor, etc.
Yeah.
So from that idea, it's not, as you're saying, it's not progress for its own sake, but it's doing something that enhances productivity. But it's also not coming in a vacuum. The West is an aging society. There is a decline in the demographics. And, Japan, Korea, even China today, and of course the West in Europe. So, and technological change doesn't happen in a vacuum. So a lot of this substitution, as you said, of capital for labor, notwithstanding the tax differentials, is happening because there's inadequate labor. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
But if you look at the world as a whole, not as nation states, but if you look at the world without national boundaries, and here's the provocative question.
Yes.
I mean, the world would presumably be a better place if labor was able to freely move. As Baldwin says in his book, labor can actually freely move on the net, not physically.
Yeah.
You can freely move. But if you can have free movement of labor between countries, then the problem would not be as acute as you think it is.
Well, I mean, I agree with this observation, which is that exactly as you say, these technologies aren't developed in a vacuum. People respond to incentives. It's no coincidence that if you're looking for the most interesting and provocative examples of robotics or artificial intelligence in elderly care, the place to look is Japan. Because there, in Japan, as you say, they've got a demographic issue. They also, related to your question, have a famous antipathy towards migrant workers working in the healthcare sector. And so there's a very strong incentive in that setting to develop technologies that can do the sort of work that could have been done otherwise by human beings. So I think we're in agreement. I think that from a kind of economic efficiency point of view, the idea of free movement of labor is a compelling idea. But speaking as a European, and you'll know this from as well, looking at our kind of political setup, the kind of political consequences of free movement have been really destabilizing, and the issue of immigration is the issue across the kind of political setting, and it's not that people dislike immigration because it's economically inefficient. There's other things going on there. So I'm sort of in agreement, but the sort of political constraints mean that that the reality is quite different. Yeah.
So Daniel, in that war between AI and humans, we
Yes.
kind of collapsed time a little bit. So I'm just going to ask some sort of question, which
Sure.
is, at the heart of this, there's this constant discussion about efficiency, productivity,
Yes.
Compression of labor. And what I'm asking is that both as economists,
Yeah.
if we accept that technology and science is showing us that nothing is fixed in the world,
Yes.
then it's not necessary that efficiency and productivity for itself has to be this kind of a holy grail,
Yeah.
So is there, within government, so because this is coming at us and
Yeah.
you yourself, are you thinking more about maybe that it's time for a complete framework change? Is that even possible? Is there any alternate framework? And the other question is that all of this is constantly bewildering because at the same time, you need structures like this to do, say, protein folding.
Yes, of course.
It's brought down the cost
Yeah.
of drugs from $3 billion to a few thousand.
Yeah, yeah.
The number of drugs that you have to look at, like you create 2,500 variations, that's come down to 250.
Yeah.
So it's constantly riding this horns of a
Yes,
dilemma,
yeah.
But at the heart of it, it's constantly, this is more efficient, this is more
Yeah,
productive,
yeah.
and that's a holy grail in itself. Do you think it's at all possible to think of the world in different terms?
I mean, one thing I would say, and it relates to the observations that you were making there, is that the way in which we talk about artificial intelligence today, often the debate is about its impact on the labor market, the impact on workers, and we worry what it's doing to the kind of quality and quantity of work. When I actually began thinking about the impact of artificial intelligence on the professions, so back in sort of 2010, actually my interest was far less in the impact on doctors and nurses and teachers, and it was far more on what it meant for patients and students and clients and recipients of these professions. Because it was, we wrote that book together, The Future of the Professions, because we felt that the traditional professions, traditional educational institutions, healthcare institutions, legal institutions were failing, that not enough people had good access to affordable education, didn't know where their legal entitlements were, didn't know how to manage their financial affairs. And the promise of these technologies, while they might have been very disruptive for traditional workers, were extremely exciting for clients and recipients and customers. And in terms of a kind of reframing, I think that's something we could helpfully do at the moment in thinking about artificial intelligence, is to try and focus as well on how we can use these technologies to improve access to the kind of expertise that traditionally might have been only available to a very privileged and a lucky few. We shouldn't be pursuing these technologies for the simple sake of efficiency or productivity. We should really have in mind the important problems that we're trying to solve in society.
Sorry, Rajat, I was just going to pursue this just for 1 second more, which was that in the morning we just kind of left it on the table because we were running out of time.
Yeah.
But I posed this both to Piyush and to Eric, that there's this constant optimism and refrain, across all technologies.
Yes.
And scientists who say, we want to leave the world a better place.
Yes.
And abundance, and in fact we've called your session Abundance Shock.
Yeah.
Because there is abundance growing, but who is it for? So
Yeah.
that concentration is definitely something that's happening. And I put out one statistic, there are just so many, but I'll just repeat that the day that Meta let go of 20,000 people,
Yeah.
its stocks went up 200%,
Yeah.
So that's abundance for some. And so we have abundance at one level, and then there's the talk of UBI growing at the
Yeah.
other level,
Yeah.
where you're just like a shock absorber. But Eric Daimler also pointed out that he said, yes, but this productivity is for everybody. And if you look at the mean of human race, it's bewildering. I mean, both are true, that there's much more inequity than before,
Yeah.
and yet there's more prosperity than before, also for everybody, So how is one supposed to think about this? How are both things true at the same time?
It's the great, and I write about this in the new book, A World Without Work, it's the great irony of technological unemployment, which is that in a way it's a symptom of success. You know, on the one hand, you solve the traditional economic problems that have plagued humankind for centuries. You know, that for 300,000 years, most people lived on just a few $100s a day. Technological progress in the 20th century, at least in theory, solved that problem. But, you know, then you have the problem that, on the other hand, that in the absence of a mechanism to share out that prosperity evenly in society, it's prosperity, you know, collectively, but some people get very small slices of the pie, if anything at all. And it's this tension that it solves one problem, the problem of how do we create collective prosperity, but then creates these other problems of how do we then share out that prosperity, how do we constrain the political power of the large technology companies who are responsible for generating it, and how do we provide meaning and purpose in people's lives when work looks very different. It's the great irony, the great challenge. I mean, I don't think I'm an optimist or a pessimist. I think I'm just a realist. That this is the challenge that we face. There's nothing inevitable about us solving these problems of inequality, of power and meaning, unless we step in and actively intervene and try and shape the direction of technological progress.
Absolutely. So, Shoma, if I were to add, not ask a question, but just add to sort of what Daniel said, I mean, the world is certainly better off. I mean, GDP has increased, and GDP itself is a problem, but let's let that pass. The GDP has gone up. Global GDP has gone up, and several years ago, I think the IMF had brought out a report on sort of poverty, which you call "Now You See It, Now You Don't." You know, and what they were basically saying in that report is that if you looked at the globe as a whole, and going back to the point I made, without national barriers, then of course the world has become a better place. You know, 1.4 billion Indians, 1.3 billion Chinese, all becoming better off. Naturally, the average per capita income of the globe, of the world, had gone up. But then you begin to impose barriers across nation states, and then look at what's happening to within country inequality, and that actually begins to exacerbate. So if you're looking at the world as a whole, definitely, it's like what trade theorists say, that you know, if you trade, you're all better off, but there are some winners and there are losers, and the winners could compensate the losers, and everybody would become better off. So it's a kind of what Sridhar said in the morning. It's a political economy issue, definitely within country political economy issue, I think, which one has to tackle. But I wanted to ask Daniel what Shoma sort of said in the beginning. You know, Kenneth Rogoff's title after the financial crisis, he said, "This time is different." Yeah. And, you know, is it really different? I mean, we've had technological shocks. Yeah. Fourth, third, second, you saw the Luddites in the film Breaking the Machine, etc. Right. I mean, and you say, because you're experiencing it at the moment. Yes. And remember that famous Dornbusch hypothesis, if you have a shock in the stock market, the immediate reaction is much higher than the sort of equilibrium that you will reach over time. Overshooting. So my overshooting result, absolutely. So are we overshooting? I mean, is this, I mean, I remember Jim Kim, who was the president of the World Bank, he didn't come to India, he was in Bangladesh in 2016, and he said 78% of the jobs in emerging markets are at risk. Yes. 78%, and everybody in India, you know, became, you know, alarm bells began to ring that we're going to lose. But it hasn't turned out to be so, right, in India. It definitely, India is of course a different story, we haven't spoken about India. But even in the West, I mean, are we over sort of exaggerating the impact of this technological shock?
So I think that has to be the starting point when you're thinking about automation, is that ever since modern economic growth began 250 years ago, people have suffered from periodic bursts of anxiety that the technologies of the time would replace all the work that has to be done, and by and large, they've turned out to be wrong. There's always been enough work for people to do, and when there hasn't been work for people to do, it's not been because of technologies. And so the question is, and it's a question that economists don't feel uncomfortable talking about, but is this time different? And the short answer, and the argument of my book, A World Without Work, is yes. And the short answer is that these technologies, as we've been describing, are just becoming relentlessly capable. They are taking on more and more tasks and activities that until recently we thought only human beings could ever do. The deeper answer, and this is what I develop in my work, is that when you look at the different economic forces that have tended to increase the demand for displaced workers in the past, there are good reasons, it seems to me, to think that those forces are going to be weaker in the future than they were in the past. That's the sort of the kind of theoretical point. The more practical point is that, having said that, I think you're looking in the wrong place if your metric of the problem is the number of jobs that people have to do. As I was saying, the challenge that we face is not that. The challenge that we face for now is that there is going to be work, but either the quality of that work might deteriorate, the pay of the work, the security of the work, the inflexibility of the work, the kind of meaning and purpose that people get from that work, or people might not be able to do the new jobs that have to be done. So, think about if driverless cars arrive in the next 5-10 years, telling a British taxi driver that they ought to retrain as a computer scientist in order to, redeploy. It's just not realistic, it's not feasible. And those are the sorts of mismatches that I think are the really pressing problems in thinking about the impact of automation at the moment.
Daniel, unfortunately, we're running really late, so I'm going to have to quickly catch up on time. We were 10 minutes late from lunch, but there's some conundrums which, again, this is just a thought-seeding question, and I hope we can keep pursuing these outside the hall as well.
Yes.
Is that there's a discussion that you can't stop innovation. There is that impulse that if you can experiment and push the boundaries of human knowledge and just knowledge, one should not stop that, because you can't play arbiter of what is good knowledge and not bad knowledge. But the deployment of it is definitely in one's control. Like the nuclear example. So maybe there's a way of thinking around this, which is that we deploy it in medical situations or in particular professions, but you don't deploy it where it can, unnecessarily replace human work. Like, why should we have driverless cars,
Yes.
And there's this discussion, again, I hope we have it tomorrow, where is there a lens that the global south and emerging economies can give to the global north, where a lot of the critics like Irene Sulaiman or Roman, who didn't come, said that there's a kind of particular way now that it's like boys with toys, that just because you can have this toy, you're playing with it.
Yes.
Whereas maybe in the global south, the approach is that it should be value-driven technology.
Yes.
What purpose is it serving? Why are we putting it out? These are questions that maybe it's worth asking as a society. It sounds naive, and I'm embarrassed to ask it.
No, I think this distinction, one of the most interesting things that I've heard about automation in the last few months, I was shown some polling evidence by a team at who are working at the University of Toronto, looking at public opinion with respect to AI. And what was really striking was how pessimistic the West are about AI and how optimistic the global South are. And I wonder, and we had a conversation about why that might be, but we didn't have good answers. And I wonder if it is something to do with the way in which, thinking the sorts of distinctions that you're making.
Daniel, I can say that we haven't spoken about India, but in India, sort of the substitution of capital for labor has happened, for various reasons, which I'm not going to get into. But our labor-intensive industries have been much more capital-intensive, like toys and textile, compared even to China.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the substitution of capital for labor has happened. But I think one is the existence of the technology and the hollowing out of the labor force that you've had in the West. We actually haven't seen the hollowing out of there are several articles that have shown that there is no hollowing out, although the skill content of jobs across the board has gone up, but there's been no hollowing out. So the question is, the technology exists, but the comparative advantage of deploying people is still very high. I mean, it's labor abundant, the price, and the incentive. And I think what you said about how do you sort of navigate through the market. I mean, one is Shoma's idea is that you deploy AI in certain industries and not other sectors, and the government decides. And the other is your idea of saying that, okay, we'll have sort of a carrot and stick system, we'll provide incentive, we'll tax capital more, we'll tax labor less, we'll have UBI or versions of UBI so there can be transfer. I think UBI has several problems, as Sridhar also mentioned. But I think a combination will have to be done. The comparative advantage of labor in India is still very, very high. We don't have automobiles, robots in automobile industry in India haven't gone up. So I think the emerging markets like India with labor abundance sort of
and that's a sort of story about relative costs.
Exactly.
And this is a really important point about automation, which is that it's not enough just to look at whether or not a machine can perform a particular task. You've then got to also look at the relative labor. Is it then profitable to use that machine? It's why in the UK, if you go onto YouTube, you can find lots of really impressive robots that can fold laundry, but we don't have robotic laundrettes because the comparative advantage is for labor. So I'm in. I think we're in agreement on that observation. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, but this is just the start of a conversation, but we'll have to end it here. There's one thought which is about data dignity, which Jaron Lanier will be talking about, that this has not come out of anywhere. We are the mine that some companies are mining, for wealth and for innovation. So how do we distribute that? Like if we are the resource, how does that resource get compensated for participating in our own automation, as Eric put it? But thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you so much.
You've put seeds out there for us to think about. And thank you, Rajat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.